The streets of Washington buzzed with excitement. Flags waved, children on shoulders giggled, and patriotic songs played from brass bands echoing through the air. President Donald Trump was scheduled to appear at the National Veterans Parade, a long-anticipated event meant to honor service members across generations. Veterans lined the front rows, their uniforms either neatly pressed or faded with time. The spotlight, however, wasn't just on the president. It was on the people he came to honor. And among the crowd stood a young man in full-dress blues, U.S. Marine Corps. His name was Lance Corporal Mason Ridge, just 23 years old, his posture straight and still. Mason hadn't told anyone what he planned to do that day. Not his squad mates, not his mother, not even the reporters who had briefly interviewed him as just another proud Marine. But inside, he held a burden few understood. And today, as the president's motorcade approached, that burden boiled to the surface. Spectators cheered. Secret Service agents scanned the area. And when President Trump stepped out of his vehicle, waving at the crowd, Mason suddenly stepped forward into the middle of the street, right into the president's path. Gasps echoed. Secret Service moved fast, but Trump raised his hand and signaled them to stop. The president tilted his head, surprised but calm. "Marine," he said into the mic, "you have something to say?" Mason nodded. The crowd hushed. Mason took a breath. His voice, when it came, was strong but trembling. "Sir," he began, "no disrespect. I stand here today not for myself, but for someone whose voice you never got to hear." The silence was electric. Even the birds above seemed to pause. Mason's brown eyes locked with Trump's. She was a Marine, too. Corporal Lily Brennan. She served 2 tours, one in Afghanistan, one in Iraq. She saved my life and 2 others when our convoy was hit. But when she came home, Mason's voice faltered. No one listened. Trump's brow furrowed.
"Go on," he said.
Mason swallowed. She struggled with PTSD. She asked for help. Denied again and again. 6 months ago, I found her. She had taken her life in her garage. She left behind a letter. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. She wrote, "I didn't die in war. I died in silence." Mason's voice cracked. "Mr. President, I don't want honors. I don't want medals. I want to know, why wasn't her life treated like it mattered? Why wasn't her pain enough?" Trump stood frozen. Even the Secret Service agents glanced at each other, unsure of what to do. A veteran in the front row wiped a tear. A woman behind Mason clutched her chest. Mason stood tall, his jaw clenched. "You want to honor us today? Then honor those who came back broken, who don't wear uniforms anymore because the system forgot them." The president remained silent for a few seconds. Seconds that stretched like hours in the stillness. Finally, he stepped forward slowly with purpose. Secret Service flanked him cautiously, but kept their distance. He stood face to face with Mason. "What's your name, Marine?" he asked. "Mason Ridge, sir." Trump nodded slowly. Then, to everyone's surprise, he reached out and placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "I don't have the right words for this," Trump said quietly. "No president ever really does, but I hear you. And more importantly, I believe you." The crowd murmured, cameras flashed. But Trump didn't look away from Mason. "I've met many brave men and women in uniform. I've heard their stories. But what you just said, I'll carry that with me." Then Trump turned to the mic. "America, we celebrate our veterans today, but this Marine just reminded us, honoring service doesn't end at the battlefield. It must continue, especially when the war follows them home." The crowd erupted in applause, but Mason still held something in his hand, a folded envelope. He hesitated, then extended it. This was Lily's letter, the one she left behind. "I've held on to it, but I think you need to read it more than I do." Trump took the letter gently. "I'll read it tonight," he promised, "and I won't forget her name." And then, in a moment no one expected, Trump offered a salute, not as a politician, but as a citizen, to Lily Brennan. Mason stood still, tears now streaming down his face. That night, in the quiet of the White House residence, Donald Trump sat alone in his study. The letter trembled slightly in his hands, its edges worn, tear-stained. The handwriting was delicate with military precision, just like the Marine who wrote it. To whoever finds this, the letter began. I hope you're someone who can do what I couldn't be heard. Trump read each word slowly, absorbing the pain behind them. Lily wrote of sleepless nights, of sounds that never left her ears, of friends she couldn't save, and others who couldn't recognize her anymore. She wrote about the guilt, the isolation, and the endless phone calls for help that led to voicemail boxes and denials. I wore the uniform with pride, she wrote. But when I needed help, I was told to toughen up. I fought wars overseas and lost battles within my own mind, but no one noticed. Or maybe they just didn't care. By the end, the president sat motionless. He folded the letter slowly and pressed it to his chest. He stared out the window, his reflection dim in the glass. The city lights glowed in the distance, but they felt far away. He whispered aloud to the empty room. We failed her. And then something rare happened. A tear slid down his cheek. The next morning, Washington was already buzzing about the Marine who had stopped the president. News anchors debated whether it was staged, spontaneous, or the beginning of something bigger. But Mason Ridge wasn't watching the news. He was back in his tiny apartment surrounded by Lily's photos and medals. The night before had drained him. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. But he felt lighter, like a burden had finally shifted off his chest. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mason Ridge came a female voice. Yes, this is Sarah Langston. I work for the Office of Veteran Affairs. The president requested a meeting today. Mason froze. With who? With him? At the White House.
Noon.
Mason stared at his phone. He thought it was over. He thought standing up yesterday was the end of his fight. Turns out it was just the beginning. At 11:45, Mason stood outside the gates of the White House in his uniform again. A black SUV pulled up. A young aide escorted him inside. The walk through the corridors felt surreal. This place, powerful, polished, historic, was a world far from where Lily had suffered. And yet her voice was here now. When he entered the Oval Office, Trump stood from behind his desk and gestured toward a seat. I read her letter, Trump said, his voice lower than usual. And I couldn't sleep. I've read hundreds of letters, Trump continued, his tone unusually reflective. But Lily's wasn't just a letter. It was a cry, a quiet one. And those are the ones we miss most. Mason nodded, trying to maintain composure. She was more than a soldier, Mason said softly. She was an artist. She painted when she couldn't sleep. She used to say it was the only way she could stop her mind from going dark. Trump listened intently. He wasn't taking notes. He wasn't rushing to the next meeting. He was present, something Mason hadn't expected. I want to start something, Trump said. A national initiative, not a campaign ad, not a press release, a real solution, and I want her help. Mason blinked. My help? Trump nodded. We'll call it the Lily Project, dedicated to mental health care and transition support for returning veterans, funded, equipped, and impossible to ignore. Mason's breath caught. Sir, she would have never believed this. Trump smiled faintly. Then let's make it so no veteran ever feels that way again. The two men sat for another hour. They talked about existing programs, the red tape, the denials. Mason didn't sugarcoat anything, and Trump didn't ask him to. When Mason left the White House, reporters swarmed him. He didn't say much, just that change was coming and that it had a name. Later that night, the official White House account tweeted, Lance Corporal Mason Ridge reminded us that not all heroes fall on battlefields. Some fall at home unheard. That changes now. The Lily Project, United States. By morning, the Lily Project was trending worldwide. News stations covered Mason's speech and the president's unexpected response. Veterans posted their stories under the hashtag. Some wrote about sleepless nights, others about friends they had lost, not to war, but to the silence afterward. Military wives, husbands, and parents joined in. Lily could have been my daughter, one mother wrote. Thank you, Mason. Mason, still adjusting to the whirlwind, sat on the floor of his apartment, reading every post he could. For every message of support, there were 10 more from veterans asking for help. Some said they'd tried everything. Others admitted they had been one day away from giving up until now. Later that day, Mason received a call from Lily's mother, Marion Brennan. "Mason." Her voice trembled. "I watched what you did. I can't believe it. My baby girl. She would have been so proud of you." Mason swallowed hard, his voice cracking. "She saved me once, Mrs. Brennan. I just wanted the world to know her name. She's finally being heard," she whispered. "Thank you." Meanwhile, in Washington, Trump had already begun meetings with the Department of Veterans Affairs. He brought up suicide prevention, rapid mental health response teams, and creating centers named after fallen veterans like Lily, where struggling soldiers could find safety, not shame. For once, lawmakers from both parties were united. They weren't debating funding. They were racing to be part of the change. At the next press briefing, Trump spoke directly to the cameras. No more waiting lists. No more toughen-up talk. These heroes gave everything. We will not let them fall in silence. We will be loud. For Lily, for all of them. The nation held its breath. Something had shifted. 3 days later, at the National Gallery of Art, a special ceremony was held. Mason had donated one of Lily's paintings, a haunting portrait of a woman in uniform staring into a mirror. But in the reflection, she wasn't in uniform. She looked tired, her eyes hollow. A single tear rolled down her cheek. The painting was titled After War. It stopped viewers in their tracks. Veterans stood quietly in front of it for minutes, sometimes longer. A few saluted, others wept. Mason stood off to the side watching. Trump arrived unexpectedly, walking past cameras without comment. When he stood in front of the painting, he didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he turned to Mason and said, "This needs to be in every VA center, every base, every Capitol hallway." Mason nodded. "She painted that during her worst week. I remember because she didn't say a word for 3 days. She said more in this painting than most of us ever could," Trump replied. That afternoon, an executive order was signed to commission and distribute 1,000 copies of After War across the country, not just as artwork, but as a permanent reminder. "Let this image be a mirror," Trump declared at the podium, "of what we've missed and what we must now fix." Mason wasn't used to the spotlight. But now, people were listening. Veterans were listening, and more importantly, policymakers were listening. He realized Lily's voice had traveled further in her absence than it ever did while she was alive. And that thought both broke him and healed him. The following evening, Mason's phone rang again. It was late, almost midnight. He debated answering, but something told him to. A young man's voice came through. "Is this Mason Ridge?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "My name's Kyle. I'm Iowa's with the 1st Infantry Division. I saw your story. I was going to end things tonight. I had a plan, but I saw Lily's painting and I don't know. It hit me hard. I cried for the first time in years." Mason's throat tightened. "Where are you right now?" Kyle gave his location. He was in a small town in Kentucky, alone in a motel room. "Stay on the phone with me," Mason said quickly. "You hear me? Don't hang up." For the next hour, Mason listened to Kyle pour his heart out. He talked about his nightmares, his guilt, his failed relationships. He had tried getting help, but the paperwork, the appointments, the wait times had all crushed his will. But tonight, Lily had reached him. By morning, Mason had called a VA emergency support team through a newly activated 24-hour hotline. A pilot program started under the Lily Project. They arrived in hours. Kyle was taken into care safely. 2 days later, Kyle texted Mason a photo of himself smiling, holding a sketch pad. "I started drawing." The message read, "She inspired me." Mason stared at the screen for a long time. He finally whispered, "You saved another one, Lily." He walked over to her photo on the shelf, saluted, and said softly, "We're just getting started." 1 week after Mason's speech, the White House organized a round with veterans from every branch of the military. Not media-driven, not ceremonial, just real people in a real room. Mason was invited, not as a guest, but as the co-host. He walked into the Roosevelt Room and found 30 veterans seated around the large table. Some wore suits, Others came in jeans and boots. A few were in wheelchairs. A couple carried visible scars. But every one of them carried the same look, the weight of experience, and the hope that maybe finally someone was listening. Trump entered without fanfare. No cameras, no press. "I'm not here to talk," he said. "I'm here to listen." And for the next 2 hours, that's exactly what he did. One Marine shared how he'd waited 18 months for a PTSD counselor. A Navy vet spoke of his friend who died by suicide after being denied treatment twice. A female Air Force officer shared the invisible wounds that never made it into her file, but haunted her every day. When it was Mason's turn, he didn't speak about Lily right away. Instead, he looked at each person in the room. "This," he said, "is what should have happened years ago. We should have had this table, these ears, this attention. But now that we do, we don't waste it." There was silence, then slow nods. Trump stood. "Every one of you is part of the Lily Project now. We'll fund. We'll legislate. But more importantly, we'll listen. You earned that. And so did she." No one clapped. No one needed to. They weren't there for applause. They were there to build something that would outlive them. Weeks passed. One morning, Mason was invited to Arlington National Cemetery. As he arrived, he saw something that took his breath away. A new memorial wall, simple white stone, curved like a half circle. At its center was a name carved in fresh granite. Lance Corporal Lily Brennan. She fought battles we couldn't see. Below her name were dozens of others, veterans who died by suicide. For the first time, their sacrifice was formally honored, not hidden in shame, but lifted in dignity. Families gathered quietly. Some held flowers, others held each other. Mason spotted Lily's mother. She gave him a gentle smile, walked over and took his hand. "She was always afraid of being forgotten," she said softly. "And now she's part of something bigger than we ever dreamed." As they stood in silence, a young girl, maybe 10, approached the wall with her father, a retired soldier. She pointed at Lily's name and whispered, "Daddy, who is she?" Her father replied, "A hero, sweetheart. The kind we need to remember." Tears welled in Mason's eyes. Later, Trump arrived walking alone without security detail. He approached the wall and stood quietly. No speech, no cameras, just respect. Then he turned to Mason. "Every president gets remembered for something," he said. "I hope I'm remembered for this." Mason didn't reply. He simply saluted. Because in that moment, the past wasn't being erased. It was finally being acknowledged. And that was more powerful than any speech. Mason returned to his apartment late that evening to find an envelope in his mailbox. It was addressed to Mr. Mason Ridge, hero friend of Lily. Inside was a crayon drawing and a letter written in large, uneven handwriting. "Dear Mason, my name is Ellie. I'm 8 years old. My big brother is a Marine. He's sad a lot and won't talk to anyone. But when we watched the news about you and Lily, he cried. Then he hugged me. He said he was going to be okay. I think Lily helped him. Thank you, and thank her, too. I drew this picture for you. It's of Lily as an angel. Love, Ellie." The drawing was crude but beautiful. A figure in uniform with wings and a bright halo. Smiling. Mason sat down slowly, the letter shaking in his hands. This little girl, this innocent soul, had captured what thousands of words couldn't. Lily had become a symbol, not of tragedy, but of hope. She was no longer just his friend. She was becoming a guardian for all those who felt forgotten. He framed the picture and placed it beside Lily's painting. Then he sat down, took out his journal, and wrote, "Lily, you always wanted to change the world. You thought you couldn't, but you have in ways we never imagined." Mason looked around at the apartment. It still felt empty, but for the first time, it also felt full of meaning because Lily wasn't gone. She was everywhere now. It had been over a month since Mason's speech. The world had changed. But Mason hadn't yet made one visit he'd been putting off. Lily's grave. He arrived just after sunrise alone, wearing his Marine dress blues, a bouquet of white lilies in one hand, her folded service flag in the other. The cemetery was quiet still. When he reached her headstone, he stopped. Lance Corporal Lily Brennan. Her battle was invisible, but her courage was not. Mason knelt and placed the flowers at the base. Then carefully he unfolded the flag, laid it flat in front of her stone, and rested his hand on it. "I know you hated attention," he whispered, "but I had to speak up. You deserved that. We all did." He paused, staring at her name. "There's a little girl named Ellie. She drew you with wings. I think she's right." A breeze passed through, rustling the nearby trees. Mason looked up at the sky, eyes filled with both sorrow and peace. He pulled something from his jacket. A dog tag. Heron. He'd kept it all this time. "I'm going to keep this if that's okay," he said softly. He stood, saluted, and gave her one final look. "I miss you, Lily, but your mission isn't over, and neither is mine." As he turned to walk away, he didn't feel the crushing weight he once did. He felt lighter, like Lily had passed the torch to him, and now it was his turn to carry the light. 6 weeks later, the first Lily Brennan Mental Health and Recovery Center opened just outside Fort Bragg. A crowd gathered filled with veterans, families, counselors, and military leaders. News crews were present, but the ceremony felt deeply personal. Mason stood beside President Trump as the ribbon was cut. Inside the center, rooms were designed to feel like home, not hospitals. Each veteran had their own space with sunlight, art, even pets in some areas. On every wall was a print of Lily's painting, After War. The main hallway was named the Brennan Way. Mason gave a short speech. "This center isn't just a building," he said. "It's a promise that we will no longer let our heroes fight alone in the dark." Trump followed with his own words. "For too long, we honored only one kind of battlefield. But the truth is, some wars don't end when soldiers come home. Today, we honor those invisible wars, and we do something about them." The room erupted in quiet applause, not loud, but meaningful. Mason took a moment to step aside and watch. He saw a young soldier walk in nervously, holding a duffel bag. A staff member greeted him with a warm smile and led him down the hall. That was it. No judgment, no